start.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the online certificate program on advanced research methodology, day 2. Today, the topic is research design. We have with us Professor Bhaktabandhu Das. This is my colleague. He's from ASBM University. Since 2008, he serves as faculty in the area of organization behavior and human resource management and the associate dean student affairs and admission. He has received his PhD in management studies with a concentration in job involvement in banking industry and MBA in human resource management. He has more than 25 years of rich experience in academics and development sector in different organizations, including Child Fund International, European Commission, and UNWFP. Being a development professional, he has track record of successful project management of various sizes and in partnership with different national as well as international organizations, expertise in project cycle management, partnership support and management, development research and communication. He has managed large-scale development program in many countries like India, Sri Lanka, Philippines, Thailand, Germany, Netherlands, Denmark, Afghanistan. He is in the editorial board of international journals. Being an academician, he has presented many scholastic papers in different national and international seminars. He has reviewed many books and articles at national and international level. He regularly undertakes the assignments of resource person for faculty development programs as well as faculty experts in PhD coursework programs for different universities. His areas of specialization are strategic human resource management, organizational restructuring and transformation, employee engagement strategies, HRD interventions, and training and research methodology and statistics. He has received Scientist of the Year 2020 by the Institute of Economic Development and Social Research, Turkey. Now, I would like to request Professor Bhaktabandhu Das to take over the session.
Thank you, Dr. Mahapatra, and it's really a great honor on my part to introduce me on this platform. I just want to know that which type of participant. I hope people from different sectors like academic, non-academic sectors are being over here, who usually take part to understand the nutshell of the research, isn't it? So in that case, I just want to deliver a talk on this specifically in the area that is called as your research design. Before going to talk about the research design, I just want to give you a very snapshots that I was listening the talk of Dr. Mishra yesterday, who was speaking about this research process. And today also I'll talk about the research design, but I'll take a thread on that, because until and unless I usually give a very clear understanding about the different research types, it's a kind of the orientation approach, then based upon that I can link to you all relating to the research design. So when basically we talk about a research, it is nothing, it is already a kind of an process which is existing, but we usually again reinvent it, re-identify it, restructuralize it with a very scientific flow. That is basically the objective of the research. Professor, can I share from here?
Yes, sir, you can share, no problem.
You can share.
Yeah. Let me see. Is it visible to the participant?
Yes, it's coming actually. Now it's visible.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thank
You
you.
can go for full screen. Full screen. Make it a full
I go for the full screen. Is it okay?
Okay.
Is it? Yeah. So you see that once we complete it, I can give you a space to ask me n number of questions as you like. But let me just complete my talk. That will be giving a good space for you to understand and to ask me any questions you are intending to know. So whenever I'm talking about a research, it is nothing. It is going beyond your personal experience. It's your thoughts, it's your feelings, your opinion, that usually do not refer to other resource information. That means something unique, something novel you usually get to establish. And sometimes what happens, some sort of subjects that always require to go beyond your personal knowledge and experience, where you usually take the reference of different publications, different studies that can give a good idea that to explore the area in detail and to probe the issue, to solve your issues, and to make arguments that usually compel you to turn outside the space. So when I talk about the research, it is nothing, it's a kind of a philosophy that always you usually establish. But one thing I just want to tell you that any philosophy you are talking about, not a single philosophy is absolute in nature. You cannot say. Sometimes what happens, seldom we address to the philosophy of research, and hardly we arrive at any philosophy. Sometimes there is also possible. So in that case, not a single philosophy is final or absolute in nature. But ultimately, what is our pursuit, our interest, our intent? Our intent is to design a philosophy which we gather from the synthesis of our work. And ultimately what happens, that becomes very never ending process. Why? Some other researcher also takes this thread and analyze it in a different form. So when you talk about the research deliverables, we produce the outlines of the report, presentations, dissertations that we need to have to deliver for basically for two basic reasons. Number one, to assist yourself to think through the process, because it's extremely difficult to do without scaffolding or structuring one's thought. The second one, because if your thoughts cannot be communicated, then you don't truly understand them. So ultimately what happens, it is a necessity to scout your thoughts, and you need to establish, you need to communicate to others about your research ideas. Considering to this, when you establish your idea, when you establish your concept, research concept, I will focus on two basic issues over here. The first issue is your ontological issue, and the second issue is your epistemological issue in the research. What is an ontological issue? Basically, if you talk about the ontological issues are those which basically talks about a theory which is already established, and it is the source of the concept. So the state of being is a question by itself in research. It cut across a myriad of possibilities about the realities, facts and truth. In essence, all researchers are meant to find out what exists. Therefore, there is nothing called invent, and everything is attempted to discover. So ultimately, it is already established truth, but the source truth you need to identify. Because until and unless you identify the source truth, you cannot understand what are the other antecedents they are related to that. That is very, very essential. So what we state as real, fact, and truth is not absolute and obvious. So that's what I tell you. Sometimes whatever you are talking about, the fact, it may not be accepted in later context. You talk about this yesterday, Dr. Misro was sharing about this. He was citing the motivational theory of Maslow. So if you look at the Maslow's theory of motivation, though it was conceptualized long back, but if you look at now, Maslow's theory is absolute in nature. Because it usually has a lot of issues, angularities pertaining to his cultural orientation process, pertaining to these the need orientation processes. So whatever being conceptualized by Maslow, yes, that is an established truth. we can take it as a thread because from there only we can go up analyzing. But that may not be the actual truth what you are talking about now. So ultimately, it is the way to see and comprehend those and claiming the subjective discovery which held as valid until proved to the contrary. So till it is not yet proved differentially, it is valid. So in that case, if you, in the process of research, if you analyze, a truth can be a non-true element. A fact can be non-fact. And a reality also can be unreal. So ultimately, it is a process of constant probing. We went on probing it. We went on identifying it. We went on justifying it. We went on establishing it. And if you look at, in this case, there are two contexts coming before. The first context is factual versus phenomenology. Realism versus relativism. So ultimately, your concept always moves between fact and phenomenon. Reality versus relativity. So in that case, it is a science of a knowledge, acquisition, dissemination, as well as the development. It entails to know what we know and how we come to know. So ultimately, we usually start off identifying from which source it is incorporated and whether that source is a kind of a valid source or not, it is an established source or not, or it entails to know what we know and we come to know. It is an attempt to find the meaning behind so-called reality. There could be any meanings of the same or similar looking phenomena, thereby opening many frontiers of knowledge. So because of this constant probing, many frontiers of knowledge get established. So if you talk about the epistemological process is the kind of the sequence. Ontology is the kind of the source, but epistemology, other researcher who went on taking as the ontological truth as a base and identified in a different use, identified in a different process, identified in a different context. So if you analyze that, epistemology is nothing in real sense, it is your review of literature. What other researchers, what the subsequent researchers they have talked about? Apart from the established truth, apart from the theoretical base, how the concept is more clarified, how the concept is more analyzed, how the concept is more segmented, that is what it talks about. So in that case, I'll tell you three specific epistemological elements. The first element is your objective epistemology. So it conceits of reality beyond the consciousness. It believed that nature exists even before the Homo sapiens. They came into being or attached value, loaded and relativist meaning to already exist. So this is called objective epistemology. So before the Homo sapiens, the nature is existing. But still, we believe, but it needs constant probing. That is the objectivity we need to identify. That is what it talks about the objective epistemology. Then the second one is, that is constructionist epistemology, which actually you are doing. You contradict the above, strongly contending that there could be no meaning without mind. There could be no meaning without mind. So ultimately, your mind is the power. So your divergent thinking, your analysis, your way of thought, it usually talks about, it usually tells you how beautifully you analyze, how beautifully you construct the concept. That is basically your constructive epistemology. So it is the outcome of object and subject interplay. The third one, that is somehow it is philosophical in nature, which is subjective epistemology. It is not like a constructive epistemology as it is emerged, but it says that it's a process that emerged out of dreams, superstitions, religious faith, which is more idiosyncrasies in nature. So we may not accept it, but we are not rejecting it. Somehow it has some relevancy. Somehow it has some relevancy. And that is also being picturized in the process of research. So whenever you are designing the process, not only you take the ontological base, but also you adopt the epistemological base, considering the objective epistemology, constructive epistemology, as well as your subjective epistemology. So these types, however, but one thing I just want to tell you, that is objective or subjective or constructive epistemology, you cannot compartmentalize. Whenever you are taking up your research, you cannot take that your research is totally focusing on objective epistemology, or your research is focusing on subjective epistemology, or your research is focusing upon a constructive epistemology. You cannot compartmentalize. So there cannot be compartmentalized knowledge, which ultimately gained, tested, revised, and accepted by the interplay between these three approaches. So ultimately, this is the interplay. Your research is the interplay of the epistemological issues like objective epistemology, your constructive epistemology, as well as your subjective epistemology. So knowledge need not be always tested on novelty, nor by its absolute precision and obviousness. There could be humanly fashioned ways of acquiring, disseminating, developing your knowledge. And this is your basic role. As a researcher, this is your role. How articulately, how uniquely, how novel way you are analyzing your concept, you are projecting your concept, and you are establishing your truth. That is what it is essential. So considering this, if I talk about the research model, straight away I'll come to the research model. I will give the reference of Creswell, who made a research in 2003. Creswell identified there are two models are there. Considering your research paradigms. One is your quantitative, which is traditional, positivist, experimental, empiricist, as advanced by authorities. Like you talk about referring to the research of Comte, Mill, Emile Durkheim, Newton, Locke, John Locke, and all. They usually focus on this quantitative base, quantitative paradigms of the research. Then the other model, which is more philosophical, that talks about the qualitative part, which is constructive, naturalist, interpretive, post-positivist, and postmodern perspectives as advanced by Bethe, Kant, Wittgenstein, Husserl, Mills, and Kubrema. So they are the people they refer to the qualitative base. So if you analyze the research, two basic models we talk about. One is your quantitative model, the other is your qualitative model. Considering this, I'll tell you about 5 basic assumptions of your research, considering this qualitative as well as your quantitative attributions. The first one is your ontological. As I told you, what is the nature of reality? What is the established truth? What is the theoretical contributions? And considering it, if we link it to the quantitative base, reality is objective and singular apart from the researcher. So we establish it, accept it. And when we talk about the qualitative, sometimes we may not accept it. So ultimately what we do? We flip. We analyze in a subjective fashion. Then the epistemological. What is the relationship of the researcher to the researched? That means what of the researcher, what the others are research scientists, they have talked about, how they have analyzed that particular theoretical base. That basically is the question. And analyzing the quantitative issues, researcher is independent from that being researched. That means you established unique. How you established unique? How you establish your unique? You collect your own samples, you analyze a particular method of collecting samples, you use some tools to collect the informations, and by applying the tools, the respondent usually responds you analyze it, you establish it. So you support the base of the quantitative analysis. And the qualitative, researcher interacts with that being researched. So ultimately, as a qualitative, yes, you do not establish the ontology, or you do not also establish or you support to the epistemological evidences, rather justifying your uniqueness of the approach. You take up a qualitative fashion by interacting the issues among other researchers, findings. Then axiological. The axiological issues that usually questions what is the role of the values? Value-free and unbiased, value-laden and biased. So if you talk about a value-free approach, the methodology you need to adopt, it's not that X researcher has adopted a particular methodology and I'm bound to adopt that. No, not like that. I can establish my own methodology to draw a conclusion out of that. But if I usually support to the other researcher the methods, the approach they usually analyze, and the same analytic tools I'm adopting, then ultimately it's nothing, it's a qualitative analysis. Then the fourth one is a rhetorical. That means what is the language of the research? Are you using a formal language, definitions, impressions, voice, use of accepted quantitative words? In a quantitative, if you talk about a quantitative analysis, there is a kind of the written down mechanism. How you'll narrate, how you'll write. Say, for example, you are using a descriptive statistic tool. You draw some conclusion out of that, some kind of information you receive. When you usually narrate, narrate that digital information, there is a specific guidelines how exactly you will report it. How you refer to your table, how you refer your figure during your writing, it is already written down. That is basically kind of a formalized approach. But when you talk about the rhetorical issues relating pertaining to the language of the research, when it talks about the qualitative establishment truth, it is informal, evolving decisions, personal voice, accepted qualitative, how uniquely, how qualitatively you are analyzing. If you talk about the Wordsworth poet, he wrote upon the Westminster Bridge, all the poem of the daffodils. When you talk about this, the same people every day morning, in the spring morning, they find daffodils, but none of the people were able to narrate a poem on that. So ultimately, it's a question of a language. It's a question of the evolving your own decision. It's your opinion. It's your own voice. How you establish it. Yes, in your research also, it is always required, because whenever you usually go for a kind of a discussion part, when you discuss the entire process, it's more narrative. It's more articulative. So ultimately, this is your own decision. This is your own command of language. How you establish it. Then the last assumptions I'd like to tell you here, that is basically talk about your methodological aspect. That means it talks about the process of research. The process of research, like whenever you are talking about a quantitative research, then ultimately talks about the deductive process, the cause and effect process, the static process, the research design approach. These are all the kind of the quantitative areas. And when it talks about the qualitative, ultimately it's more inductive. It is more mutual simultaneous shaping of factors. It is your own emerging design process, how you narrate it. Because the methodology you establish, the way you analyze, that is your own way of analysis. You are unique to that. So now I will give you a very quickly, I'll go for some types of research. When you talk about the historical research, basically it's very systematic and objective locations, evaluations, synthesis of the evidence. to establish the facts and the conclusion out of that. Say, for example, you need to analyze why the event has happened. Who are the people who are involved to that? What time it was occurred? How people are supported to? When you went on analyzing the particular incidents which has happened in the past, that basically your humanitarian way of analysis, and that's basically your historical research. Then the next one, it talks about your comparative research. It is a little more technical than historical. Often used together with historical research to compare people's experience of different societies, either between times in the past or parallel situations in the past. That means you compare under two situations, two conditions, present and the past. What are the trends are there? How the difference are seen? I'll tell you. Say you talk about the culturalization process. You want to analyze the culturalization process. What was the culturalization issues of a particular tribe X are seen years back? What are the culturalization issues you are finding now? When you compare, that is basically comparative research. And it also, you cannot say that it has a very macro level analysis. It has also a micro level analysis. Macro level analysis where you usually interact with people, you relate with the people, you discuss with the people, or even it can be a micro level analysis referring to your individual experience. And somehow it also links to your experimental research, where whenever you are comparing, you usually compare by keeping some controlled conditions, keeping some situations constant. You analyze these. Say, for example, I'm telling you that teaching with knowledge and teaching without knowledge. So, say for example, a specific category of students we are teaching with a noisy environment and we assess their delivery. And the same amount of students we usually train without the noise environment and we assess the delivery. Then we compare the result and process. Whether noise has any role to play in enhancing the performance of knowledge of the students or not, if we intend to know, in that case, we can use a comparative research. Now I'll tell you about a descriptive research. So where instead of examining the records, artifacts, descriptive research relies on your observation as a meaning of collecting data. There are different type of descriptive research tools also we use, like the central tendency tools like mean, median, mode, and any kind of a pictorial analysis like line graph, bar graph, histogram, the pie graphs. These are all if you talk about the descriptive research tool. So ultimately what happens, this kind of a research basically talks about your own observations. When you collect the information, the data is the informations that is you collected from either a primary source or a secondary source, you went on analyzing it. That can be a descriptive research. And it examines the situations to establish what is normal, what can be predicted to happen again under same circumstances. That also situational analysis you can make. Observations are written down, recorded in some way in order to be subsequently analyzed. So whatever the observations you are talking about, you usually record it, you usually written down it. So ultimately that will help you to analyze, that will help you to reiterate and to project in your own way, in your own tone. Then it depends upon human observation and responses distortions in data and can occur in biased questions in interview questionnaires selective observations of events. This is very, very important. If you talk about this descriptive research, sometimes what happens, it becomes futile if there is any bias questions or bias interview processes being adopted. So ultimately, actual information, the right informations, we never solicit, we never receive, and we went on analyzing, that becomes a biased report. So that is the biggest concern of this particular report. Then the next one, is your correlational research. Correlational research is the analytical survey or correlation research in quantity. It is a word, that means it basically talks about the relationship between two elements, two phenomena, two situations, two contexts. And correlational research are basically of two types. One is your relational studies. The other one is your prediction study. Relational studies, what we do, you usually explore the relationship between two elements. You identify. Say, for example, malnutrition causes poor memory. So is there any relationship with the malnutrition and the poor memory? When you need to establish how you can play to that, how you can justify to that. Take a particular class of people as an experimental group. Take a class of people, those are basically the control group. The control group you provide without nutrition or malnutrition. Malnutrition means abnormal. It might not be regulative. It might be kind of the crisis. So lack of nutrition or even overnutrition might be. That type of control group you establish, and other group you establish with healthy diets. After a certain time, you observe, you assess the memory state of both the groups, the control and the experimental. If you find a difference are there, that's nothing, that's a relational study. And a prediction study, that basically when you talk about the futuristic relationship, that basically talk about a predictional research. So the next one, it talks about the experimental research, which is mostly you will encompass. And all your research design is focusing on this particular area of research. Researchers here try to isolate and control every relevant condition that determines the events investigated, so as to observe the effects when the conditions are manipulated. So it's a question of a manipulation, sequential manipulations of the event. And if you talk about the different type of experimental designs we adopt in this experimental research, the first one is your pre-experimental design. It is very unreliable assumptions. Because why it is unreliable? It doesn't have any experimental control. Simply we went on analyzing. So it is never a kind of an in-depth analysis. It is never a kind of a scientific analysis. But when you talk about the true experimental, it is a rigorous check of the identical nature of group before testing the influence of variable on a sample of them under controlled circumstances. So why it is true experimental? Starting from deciding the sample, using the assessment tool, analyzing and interpreting. Every stages you apply some methodology. Every stages you apply some procedurals. Every stages you apply some logic. That's why it is called as a true experimental research. The next one is your quasi-experimental. Not all conditions to experimental design cannot be fulfilled, but shortcomings are identified. It seems to be quasi in nature, apparently. Sometimes it, yes, why it is called as your quasi-experimental? Because sometimes also, if you talk about the systematicity we need, yes, the systematicity we need to adopt. But in some cases also, we need to collect information where there may not be available tools by the observation of the information or observation process or by a process of transact, we collect information, we establish. So in that case, that can be a persistent. Then you talk about the kind of a ex post facto research, which is just reverse. That means what we are doing, considering the independent variable, we usually analyze the dependent variable. But here the reverse. Considering the dependent variable, we analyze what is the independent, what is the cause. So it's a reverse modality. So it is called as your ex post facto research. Then the next one is your evaluation research. Here what we do, descriptive type of a research designed to deal with complex social issues. So-called the fourth generation research, what you are doing, that is nothing, that is your evaluation research. Outcomes do not represent how things are, how they work, rather they represent meaningful construction which groups create to make sense or situation they find themselves in. As I told you, you are focusing more on constructive epistemology. You are focusing more on, so ultimately you design your own process. You establish your own logic. You establish your own scientific approach to enter into the process, to analyze, to interpret and prove. So it is recognized that the construction are shaped by values of your values of the constructor. So ultimately it is unique to you. What type of methodology you are using, what type of technology you are adopting to justify a fact, to justify a situation that is unique to yourself only as a researcher. So intrinsically, it links to physical, psychological, social context exclusively. So in whatever the research you are undertaking in your social science, it is more evaluative in nature and it is more constructive in nature. So evaluation of this construction is highly dependent on involvement and viewpoint of the evaluator. So what is your objective? What is your basic issues? Accordingly, you establish an evaluation tool. And once you adopt an evaluation tool, based upon that, you collect the information, you analyze. So evaluation should be action-oriented. Define a course that can be followed, usually that requires negotiation. Participants are equal partners in every aspect of the design, implementation, interpretation, and resulting action. I'll tell you. If you talk about a kind of a PR exercise you are undertaking, sometimes what happens as a researcher, if you use your own mind without taking confidence to the participants, you went on analyzing the issues, then ultimately what happens? Ultimately, you lose the confidence of your respondent. So whenever you are taking up the research, if you take your participant starting from the implementation to the interpretation and resulting action, then ultimately your research will carry some meaning to it. Then the next research I'll tell you about the evaluation research, but that is basically the system analysis research, which is a kind of a holistic type of a research that reverses the three stages in order to think, which is typical of a scientific inquiry. Where what you do here, you identify the encompassing whole, the system of which the phenomenon problem is a part. So entire system-wide analysis you need to identify. Then the next one, evaluate the behavior or property of the encompassing whole. That means not only you identify, but you evaluate each and every aspect of it. and you explain the properties. So ultimately, there are three things are there in a system analysis process. Number one, identification, evaluation, and explanations of a system. Then it links to your responsive evaluation. So in which you usually adopt a very very series of investigative stages to undertake how your evaluation will take part, starting from your data collection, your evaluation, and your suggested changes. That means when you are talking about the data collection, identify the issues from the people directly involved in the program, identifying the further issues from the program documents, observe how the program is actually working. Sometimes what happens, you are using some data collection tool. Say, for example, I am using a data collection tool, a questionnaire I am using. But considering to this situation, the questionnaire may not be feasible enough. So instead of a questionnaire, if I can go for a kind of an interview schedule, or even if I can go for a kind of the observation tool, or even I can go for a kind of a transact tools, that will be better. Say, for example, I have gone to a field. In a field, I need to assess the happiness of the children. If you talk about the happiness of the children, how you will study that? What data you will collect over there? The small kids, the age is around 3 to 4 years, and you want to study their happiness. How you study that? How it is possible? How it is practicable? So in that case, if you go through a questionnaire, whom you will ask to the questions? Ultimately, the questions will be surrogate responses. It will not be a direct response, it will be surrogate response. The questions will be reported by the parents. The question will be reported by any kind of a social gatekeeper of the community. He might be a village priest, he might be a teacher, he might be other social worker who are available over there and can respond. Or the response can be given by some elderly members, elderly children. But that is not the actual response. That is not the true response. So ultimately, if you are using the questionnaire to study the happiness of the kids and you are using a questionnaire, then there is a fault at your design. Then what exactly you need to do there? The best mechanism is your observation tool. How you can observe? I'll tell you. I'll give a very good example while I was going through a study on happiness in a post-tsunami phase at Philippines. The place is General Nakara. When I went over there, I noticed that after restorations, the rehabilitation process was taken care by the local government, by some NGOs. But I found that sense of happiness is lost over there. I wanted to analyze from this scratch to see how the kids are really happy. Then one project team member was with me. She's a Filipino lady and she told, it is a misnomer on your case. How will you study this? How the kid will respond to you? I told, I'll do that. Take me a place where the kids are playing. Where usually in that community, whatever the time you talk about, whether it is in evening or morning, where you find some kids with the parents even, how I will see that the kids are playing, I will say you over there. When I went there, I took a small stick only. I went on creating some kind of a drama, playing with the children to make them familiarized, like the kind of the breaking the ice process. When I was little familiar with them, I took a stick. On the sand, I draw a circle. I put the eyes and saw a sense of happiness. And I told the kids, again I was and allow the kids to draw like that. From there, I can observe the psychology. Even how the children are interacting with the parents. From there, I can understand whether children are happy or not. When the children are taking food, how satisfactorily they are taking food, how happy they are when they take their food. From the sense of behavior, I can assess that. I can analyze that. So ultimately, when you talk about your data collection process, you need to be very, very sure that the tool you are using is appropriate to collect the information of that particular class of people, that particular type of people. Accordingly, you need to establish. Not necessarily data collection always requires a questionnaire, a fundamental mistake many times we adopt. Suppose you intend to study about, say for example, the employee engagement process in a banking sector, and you would like to collect some information from the senior managers. So if you give them the questionnaire, will they be able to respond to you? Will they have time? Will they provide you sufficient time? You take a questionnaire having 15, 20 questions and you will give to them and they will respond. Is it possible? So ultimately, if you can either take a kind of an interview scheduling, like a tea break discussions, might be an on-schedule interview. You can collect, you can solicit information. And the second one, it talks about your evaluation process. So the design of an evaluation based on the data collected and reporting findings, how you collect the data, how you use a particular statistical tool. Is it necessary that every time you need the kind of the relational statistics, or every time you need a factorial statistics? Is it necessary? Do you want to showcase your research by using high-funded statistical tools? You can project a best research report even by using the mean as a platform of your evaluation tool. You can use it. So ultimately, the evaluation tool you are using, considering to the data, is very, very essential, and you have to decide very scientifically. Suggested changes, informing the participants of the findings in the way specifically designed for each type of audience. So if there is any kind of changes are required, you solicit also information. Place your research. I'll tell you that when I did my research, I did my PhD. When my synopsis was about to finalize, my research guide told that tomorrow there will be a presentations before 4 other researchers. They will evaluate the proposal and any changes they suggest we need to look at. After that, I will take a call how we'll take up a very structural approach. Then the next morning I found he invited some other authorities to his house. I was there. And what he did, that he told, see, my scholar has presented the synopsis. This synopsis he has presented. And please give your suggestions where there is a flaw, where I need to change, I need to guide my scholar. You suggest. So question is that this is a beautiful approach to make your research more structuralized. So whenever you are collecting information again, after your analysis, present it. If there is any kind of suggestive measures, you possibly seen over there, and you solicit the information, integrate in your process. Then the next one is your action research. Similar to experimental research, it is carried out in a real world rather than in the context of a closed experimental system. It involves small-scale interventions in the functioning of the real world and a close examination of the effect of such an intervention. Suppose I would like to tell you that I want to assess in a retail sectors. There are different sections are there in the retail house. I want to assess that which kind of a section, whether the kids section or the women section or the apparels, which section is more attractive. So in that case, I can keep a feedback, having 3 or 4 questions. People who move over there, they can provide a kind of an opinion over there. I can analyze, and that can be beautiful action research. So essentially, on-spot procedure designated to deal with specific problem event in a particular situation, where no attempt is made to separate particular feature of a problem from its context in order to study it in isolation. It is not isolated. It is on-spot analysis. But it always necessitates constant monitoring and evaluation. Carried out, the conclusions from the findings are applied immediately and further monitored. Whatever you are observing, immediately analyze it and proceed. As a practical form of research, it aims at specific problem or a situation, having little or no control over independent variables. It cannot fulfill the scientific requirement of the generalizability. No scientific requirement is there. Straight on process analysis, on process implementation, analysis, and reporting. Then the next pattern of research, that is basically called as your ethnographic research. Researchers are interested how subject of the research theories about their own behavior rather than imposing a theory from outside. Any ethnographic research, any anthropological studies are nothing. Those are all ethnographic researches. To represent a view of the world, it is structured by participants under observation by eliciting phenomenological data. So considering to the phenomenological data, we analyze it. It is always taking place on distributed natural setting of subjects. It represents the totality of the social, cultural, economic situation regarding to the context to be equally important as the action. But one thing I am telling you, if you talk about the ethnogenic research, it is really a difficult form of research. Because ultimately what happens, we usually sometimes went on uncovering many sensitive issues, which is essential to define. But ultimately what happens, if we adopt to those sensitive issues, that might affect any kind of accountability. So somehow it is called as difficult form of research. It is often hidden and rarely explicit. It needs to consider language and behavior of subject surrounding conditions in which they work. So while we undertake this research, we have to be very, very serious. We have to be very, very practical. We have to be very, very focused. How we really tactfully manage the sensitive issues while we try to uncover any facts that are behind to those issues. Risk, cultural backgrounds of the research can affect the outcome. Naturalistic settings means that it is impossible to repeat this situation to verify the research. So another thing I am telling you, there is a risk. If we are really not logical, if you are really not careful, then once we lose that research setting, we cannot get that research setting again. Because establishing that research setting, collecting information, that is very, very difficult. So there is a risk. So we have to be very, very careful when we undertake this kind of a research process. Whatever the cultural ambiguity are there, before we enter into the process, we need to structuralize those ambiguity issues so that while we undertake the research, it may not create an hindrance for us. Then the other area of research, those are basically called your feminist research. Here, if you talk about the feminist research, no single set of methodology, rather a related set of practice which started from position on research, which they say that gender and issues of identity politics must be considered as an enormously influential category in social theory. No such methodology is there. No such specific principles are there. It is you who usually adopt your methodology, analyze the process. So those researchers who ignore its influence have invalid knowledge as non-feminist paradigms. Usually ignore the partiality of the researcher's idea about the social world, undertaken with political commitment. If you talk about a feminist research, sometimes it is undertaken with a political commitment. Sometimes it is undertaken with any kind of federal commitment. Sometimes it is undertaken with any kind of legal commitment. Those are all feminist research. So ultimately, in that case, you are ultimately backed by some kind of commitment force. So in that case, you adopt a methodology as required, as and when required. So it is a very important form of research because while this form of research is not uniquely political, it exposes the fact that all methods of social research are political to the extent that they are gendered and really on specific kinds of representation of the identity. Then the last I'll tell you about the cultural research. The cultural research are basically the analysis of different type of cultural issues, cultural findings, and can be a kind of a text that is expanded through many cultural manifestations in form of an opera, in form of a TV, in form of a cocktail party, fashion. So the main criteria of cultural text is that one should be able to read some meaning into the phenomenon. Even I am telling you, even your experimental research, you might use some kind of cultural research. That is possible. Some kind of a role playing, you can usually intervene, and from there you collect the information which might be very substantial to justify your concept. So the main criteria of cultural text is that one should be able to read some meanings into the phenomena. You have to be very clear why you undertake that. What is its necessity? How it is relevant to your main research objective. So therefore it is generated which out of the different methodologies which allow you to analyze the cultural text that can be replicated, that can be disproved, and that can be generalized. So ultimately, I will tell you about the cultural pattern of research are mostly, I will tell you, used in a kind of a quantitative researches. Structural property of language, Bronsky, Chomsky, Flavel, they have worked a lot on psycholinguistic and all. So those people, they usually studied about the structural property of the language. So language research is mostly a cultural based research. sociolinguistics, the ethnography of speaking, or the semiotic theories like you talk about the sign languages. So any kind of a linguistic research are mostly focusing on the cultural research, where we usually adopt the tools like opera, TV, cocktail parties, fashions. Through this process, we collect the information, the cultural priorities, cultural context. We collect, we analyze. Ultimately, if you talk about the cultural research process, there are three things we usually analyze the cultural research. The one is your content analysis. That means the entire story is being identified into certain content area, certain indicators. Each indicator will be identified with some ratings. And accordingly, from the story, we analyze how much ratings the each indicator comprises in the total story. That is basically called as a content analysis, which I do not want to discuss. Your other teachers will talk about this content analysis. So ultimately, it is a kind of a positivist approach. Then the other one, it talks about the semiotics, where you talk about, as I told you, like a type of sign language analysis and all that we usually, whatever we analyze from there, from these sign languages, we usually report it. Then discourse analysis, any kind of discourses like talk about the focus group discussion or a group discussions or any kind of interface. From this process also we collect some sort of information. So when you talk about the cultural research is really being analyzed under three ways, three manners: content, semiotics, and discourse. Then now I'll come to the real area, what we are talking about. I'll tell you about some sensible questions considering this, because till now I was telling you about where the research, what basically talks about a research, how the research being, what to say, identified through the ontology as an epistemological base. And when you talk about the epistemology, I talk you about that how we usually focus the area like objective epistemology, subjective epistemology, or constructive epistemology. I also told you about the different types of researches. But question is that after analyzing this, there is a big question always lies in your mind. The first is, how do I know which research methodology to choose? When you plan for taking up your research, you are entering into the what to the doctoral programs or pre-doctoral programs or master thesis analysis, or you are entering into any research process to write an article maybe. So ultimately, always there is a question in your mind. How you will know that which methodology is really appropriate for you? Because as I told you that yes, ontological and epistemological issues are there. There are different theoretical constructs if you talk about how the theoretical constructs was established, what type of methodology the theorist was used at that point of time, and in subsequent form, what are the other researchers they have used the different type of methodologies, what are their methodologies they have adopted to establish the truth. And if you also work on the same area with new antecedent, with new openings, then what methodology you will be adopting? Because why I'll tell you, your methodology is very, very important pertaining to the different areas. Number one, it relates to your subject, your sample. There is that different demographic factors. There is their culture, their gender, their language, their religion. That is one area. It talks about the kind of the level of intelligence of your participants. That might be. It might be relating to the cultural priorities. It might be relating to the situational context. So, considering this, multiple issues are there. Considering these multiple issues, you are really confused. Why you are really confused? Because different researchers have used different type of methodology. You are confused saying that which methodology is really important and pertinent considering your issues. So ultimately, the focus is how you can establish the research methodology for you. There is another one. Second question is that, can you mix the research methodologies? Of course, I'll tell you, in principle, it is not a healthy affair. It's not good. By principle, mixing different methodologies, it is having no taste at all. Different taste. But sometimes it is also essential. Of course, I tell you, I advise you, but in my research, I did in my PhD work, I use different methodologies. There is a mix of research methodology. Then the third one, how do I know whether my question is worth researching or not? That means whenever you are establishing a research question out of a content area, when you establish your rationality of the study and establish some questions, research questions, how your research questions are really pertinent, how your research questions can really establish the truth, how your research questions can really project or provide a new sight to the other researchers so that the other researchers will be attracted to catch your thread and move it forward. So these are the areas, these are the three basic questions as a researcher always you encompass with. And this always gives you a food for thought to establish a design. So whenever you talk about the research design, it is nothing. It is nothing. It is a blueprint of your report. It is a kind of a skeleton of your report. You must have seen that in any kind of puja, of course, I talk about people from other places are over here, but if I think you must be knowing about that we established a lot of religious festivals in India. Say there is a Durga Puja, there is Ganesh Puja, these are the different pujas are there. What we do, we usually prepare the idols with the clay and we pray it. But if you analyze, if you narrate the process, what the artist he usually draw, how he does makes a perfect ideal. He first makes a cross, a wooden cross, and then what he does, he usually tie it with straw and the rope, giving a shape. Then put some rock mud over it, wet mud. Then after that, allow to dry. Then polishing, then drying, then polishing, then giving a kind of a primer color, a white color. Then after the actual color is given, then the artistic touch, the aesthetic touch will be given over there. So actually the same thing you will usually take up in your research design. Whenever you talk about your research design, what type of method you will use in collecting the information? What type of method you will use in analyzing the information? What type of method you will use in reporting? What type of method you will use to prepare a good report? Every point there is a written down mechanism, there is a written down policy. So in your method of study you establish what should be your research design. Each objective of your research leads to a particular design. So in your research, in toto, it can include a descriptive design, it can include a causal research or even a factual design. So what type of research design you will use? Even when you collect the information, from whom you will solicit the information? You will solicit the information from the participants. Who are your participants? What type of method you adopted to collect the information? How you selected your participant? Whether it is a probabilistic approach or it is non-probabilistic approach. That means a sampling technique, sampling design. So ultimately, whenever you are talking about the research design, starting from data collection, selection of sample, data collection, data analysis, interpretation, evaluation, reporting, every process there is a step. There is a kind of a specific guidelines. So each guidelines, when you adopt a scientific guidelines we adopt, then you talk about that you really followed a good research design. So ultimately, before that, you usually enter into this process, as I tell you, you usually ponder around three basic questions. First, how do I know that my methodology is the best one? How can I really select a unique methodology considering to the others, referring to the others? Then the next, can I mix all methodologies together? Or whenever you are asking some kind of a questions to collect any information, are your questions really pertinent? Are your questions are really helpful and supportive enough to provide you the actual information that you intend to know? That is what it talks about, the questions, sensible questions. So then, I'll tell you about the research design. Now we'll reach to the process of research design. So the research design is what then? It is a glue that holds all elements together. All elements, when they pull together, they create a framework of your research. So your research design is nothing, your research framework. From the research design itself, a researcher can understand that what type of design being used. Starting, I'll tell you how it is reflected. Even when you write down the title of your thesis, title of your report, from the title of the report, a researcher can understand that what research design must have been used in that particular research area. From the objective of the research, each objective has a specific design. And each design links with an analytic tool. Each design links with an evaluative format. Each design links with a reporting format. So ultimately, it is a glue that clubs together all the elements. So as I told you, referring to the research of the authority, Dr. Zygmunt, it is nothing, it's a kind of a master plan. Specifying the methods and procedures allows for collection and analysis of your information. That's what I told you. But always it focus upon, always it stress upon a systematic approach. So ultimately it's a blueprint. It's a process of measurement and it's a process of analysis. So that's what I wanted to tell you, that to decide a specific design, you encounter with the questions like, number one, what is the study about? What type of data is required? If the study talks about the employee engagement strategy of the Indian banking sector, it's very broad. It's very broad. Who are the employees? What type of bank? Whether it is public or whether it is private. Which area you are talking about? Indian banks. That means how many banks in India you have taken for your research? What is the purpose of your study? Then what is your basic objective? What do you want to know? When you take about an objective, it's a very generic objective. Taking a generic objective cannot reach you to a specific conclusion. Your objective has to be very specific. So which sources you need data for this study? When you talk about the employee engagement strategy, are you really collecting the information Those are already organizational archives. So collect the organizational archives and analyze. But will it be sufficient enough to analyze your information? Or you need some other sources? Do you need some other sources like a secondary sources? Sorry, primary sources? Or you need only secondary sources like organizational archives? Any published report? Any articles? Any data already published in the past? Are you only simplifying in those areas, or you need to extend your sphere of collection of information, like using some primary process of analysis, collecting information, soliciting information in support of a, or by the support of a questionnaire, by the support of a survey tool, by the support of a kind of a interview scheduling, by the support of a group discussions, by the support of a transact. What exactly you would like to do? So what is the purpose of the study? And if whatever the purpose of the study you decide accordingly, you need to find out that from which sources you can collect information. So what should be the place or the area of the study? This is also demography. Because whenever you are established or any truth, you undertake the research process, you always focus upon a sample. You are not focusing upon the universe. But always you relate your sample with the universe. You need to justify that yes, whatever the information you collected from your space samples, it is somehow related, somehow similar, or somehow significantly seen in case of the universe. If it is significantly different, then yes, something unique you are saying. But if you are saying the same, what other researchers have shown, what the universe talks about, then ultimately you are alike with others. But you need to justify some differences. Then the next one, what time approximately is required for the study? This is very, very important. I just want to tell you very funny question. Do you want to create a career in research, or you want to take the research to qualify a degree? Which is true? If you think that you would like to undertake the research to qualify the degree, then you need to focus the timeline. If you want to create a career in research, you extend your time as you want. But yes, absolutely this is not true. One thing I'm telling you why. There are certain researches are there. Those are longitudinal researches. Those research expects certain amount of time. At every time gap, the intervention has to happen, and a time series analysis has to be shown that what is the trend. But there might be sometimes you usually mostly you undertake a cross-sectional research. That means at a particular time you collect the information, you analyze the information. So, but whatever, whether it is a cross-sectional study or whether it is a longitudinal study, each research has a specific timeline. That means you have to logically distribute. You need to have your detailed implementation plan, that is DIP. When you decide your DIP, you need to identify the intervention, the conceptual intervention, certain time. Based upon that, you establish your questionnaire, designing questionnaire, and collection of information, analysis of information, then reporting and documentation. Entire process, some specific timelines are there. Each area has to be distributed with specific time, and that detailed implementation plan has to be there. Otherwise, what will happen? You cannot give logic. Sometimes what happens? Data collection you have given 3 months, but you went on taking say 1 month, 1 year. Ultimately, 9 months you killed from the other area like analysis and reporting. So you are not doing ethical to your research. So when you talk about the research is an ethical research, you need to follow the timeline. What type of sampling should be used? As I told you, whether it is a purposive sampling or a convenient sampling, or you talk about the probability samplings, stratified sampling, systematic sampling. What type of sampling? Whether it is probability sampling or non-probability. If that is a probability sampling, what type of tool sampling type you are adopting? If it is non-probability, what type of sampling tool type you are adopting? Accordingly, how you decide your sample size? You cannot take the entire universe. What is the demography of this study? What is your boundary of your study? So all members of that boundary area may not be also your samples. How you usually identify who are the best persons will be your sample for your study from that demographic area? That you need to establish. So the data collection techniques, then how you can analyze that. Very important thing, it talks about the expenditure, budgeting. You have to go for a kind of a specific budgeting for your research. What is your capital expenses, capex and opex? For your capital expenses, suppose you purchase a laptop, you want to procure some kind of softwares and all. Then other operational expenses like you are designing the questionnaire, printing the questionnaire, communicating to the respondent, sending emails, telephonic. So telephone, email, stationeries, these are all your operational expenses. So you have to make your budgetary plan before you start your research, so that your research will be really appropriate in all forms. So in that case, as I tell you that the basic features of the good research design is that it is a specific source and type of information that relevant to the research problem. And the approach distills be used gathering, analyzing data, time and cost, budgetary provision. How much time, how much money is required to undertake the research, it has to be clear. So when you talk about the good research design, that constitute a clear and indicative research problem. Procedure and technique, that usually you are adopting a specific procedure and technique you are adopting to collect information. And the population you are collecting for the study, how scientifically you are deciding the population. And the method you are adopting in analyzing it. So in that case, when you talk about the design, it has to be grounded. The concept has to be routinely identified, logically identified. The process is situational on a context. And it should not be too redundant, and it has to be efficient. But I will, before I start with the different type of research designs, I just want to tell you that there are basic problems with the research design. Those are basically the errors. You commit a lot of errors in your research design. If your design fault is there, then ultimately that cannot provide a righteous report, righteous information to your research. Like to talk about the total error, which includes the random sampling and non-sampling errors are there. Whenever you are collecting information are there. So even though you are using a random sampling tools, but sometimes what happens, you cannot give guarantee that whoever will be your sample, they are the appropriate, because it's a kind of a blind analysis. Yes, some strategy you are adapting, but the cases you are getting, it is unintentional in nature. So if there is any sampling fault at that point, that is called as a random sampling error. There are certain response errors are there, and the response error, those are basically the researcher errors. What are the researcher errors? That is surrogate information. I went on doing my PhD work. I need 600 data to be collected within 2 months of time. In a day, I can collect only 3-4 data or maximum 5 respondents. So because each respondent logically, if there are 20 questions are there, I need 30 to 40 minutes because to interact, to provide question and collect information. And there are some logistic timing are there, going over there, reaching over there, collecting information. So in a day maximum I can collect 5 cases, 5 respondents. In a month I can collect 150. In 2 months I do have time in my hand. So in 2 months I can collect only 200, 300 cases are there. But I need 500 cases to be collected. But I don't have time in my hand. So ultimately what I do? I utilize another member to collect information on my behalf. So the information is collected by that member. He is a surrogate information. Because I am a key user, but he is the end user. I designed the questionnaire, but he is using the questionnaire on my behalf. So he is the end user. So ultimately, he may not share, he may not disseminate the same information that I intend to ask my respondent. So that is called as a researcher error. There might be a measurement error. The question tools you are using, any questionnaire doesn't always require that it will be always in a rating scale. Fundamentally, we make a rating scale. Why? What is the necessity of rating scale? Do you think that only rating scale is the only scale by what we can analyze the information? We can collect the information, we can measure it. There are other scales are there. So there are problems are there. Population definition, how we decide the samples. And similarly also we sometimes called as a data analysis errors are there. While we analyze the data, there might be data analysis errors are there. Because the appropriate analytic tools we may not use. Every time, if you ask the student, which test, so I use a chi-square. Why use a chi-square? What is the necessity of a chi-square? Which type of test? Where it can be used? Why can't you use a t-test? Why you use a t-test but not an analysis of variance? Both the concepts are same. Both are studying the mean variances. T-test is studying, ANOVA is studying. But ANOVA is applied in which case? T is applied in which case? Only when two independent groups are there you can apply. But more than that, then your hands is tied. You use other sources, other information. Why you are using only correlation? Why can't you use a partial correlation? Why can't you use a kind of the semi-partial correlation? What is the objective of a partial correlation? What is the objective of a semi-partial correlation? So ultimately, there are different type of analytic errors are there. We use a statistical tool, but ultimately it gives a different error. But we are helpless because everything is machine made. We are totally techno-savvy. We are really not grounded. We do not really understand that how the T can be calculated, how the ANOVA can be calculated. What is the difference between a T and ANOVA? As we are having the easy access SPSS, use ANOVA. May not be it is useful to that context. Interviewer error is there. Respondent selection, questioning, recording, cheating, these are all errors. As an interviewer, you are collecting information, but you commit many interview errors are there. What are the interviewer errors? So suppose I use some persons, I will tell you an interviewer error. Once I had a kind of the field survey. I went to the field in one area that is in the remote village of Tamil Nadu that is called as Kodiyakerai and Kodiyakadu, that is in Nagapattinam district, that is just end of India. And I wanted to study there, the assignment was to study the adolescent health, the adolescent girls' health. And when I went there to observe, to assess, because I went as an observer over to that field, when I went, I found a girl age about 25-30 years, carried a pen and paper. She is sitting in a community where many women are there, girls are there, adolescent girls are there, small kids are there, some aged women also, old ladies are there. And what happened, what she is doing, the objective I am telling you, very funny, the objective is a focus group discussion. And adolescent girls' health is to be studied. So when I went, that lady is completely sitting, coolly discussing, merrymaking with those respondents. asking some question in between, playing with the kids, collecting information. Approach is good, I don't deny. But what I noticed there, the information who is providing, the information are provided by the geriatrics, the old women. There are 3-4 women are there. They take a leadership role in responding. Is it a focus group? When you talk about a focus group, the complete homogeneousness has to be there. Any heterogeneous context has to be avoided. If that is the adolescent girl's case, if the health issues of the adolescent girl has to be intervened, then the adolescent girls has to be your participants. But any reports is collecting, all the report are information, those are surrogate information, and they also encompassed with interview error, because whatever she says, that the old lady says, she is recording. And the other girls, they sit like a Mickey Mouse. They don't have guts to speak. They encompass their health issue, but they don't have right to speak. So this is not a focus group discussion. So ultimately, when we select a respondent, we have to be very, very careful who is your respondent. Then another area talks about the questioning skills. As an interviewer, you need to have a very good questioning skills. Always don't take a kind of a pen and paper, write down the question, read the question and ask. That is not required. It has to be back of your mind. Whenever you go to the field, you go with sufficient knowledge and understanding why those questions are asked. If that question is too directive, went on asking the question by different question, other questions. Just winding, collect the information. Be informal in questioning. Don't be so formal in questioning skill. If you become formal in questioning skill, people will be scared. They will not give the free and open responses to you. Whenever the responses are collected, how you record it. Recording doesn't mean that you take a tape recorder or a video recorder, somebody will record it, or somebody will take a tape recorder, like in your mobile. No. Recording means some points you write down. After you make a call of the day, you return back to your home. You analyze, you write your report. So that point, don't go for an extensive recording mechanism or reporting mechanism. Sometimes also you do cheating error. That means actually you do not intervene into the field. Actually you do not collect information. So whatever the information you share, those are all fabricated information. Those you design according to your song. So your song is actually not expected. The objective of the researcher is only expected, which is really not reflected over there. Then the next one is your respondent error. Sometimes what happens, if you usually go with some sort of context, which is very non-responsive, there you will be noticing that people have inability and unwillingness to express their views. Suppose you want to study the job satisfaction of the employee. There are some sensitive questions are there you are asking to the employee. And if you take this setting, like formal setting, like your officiating process you approach, you usually collect information. In that case, your respondent may not be free enough to respond you. Why? Because they are in a formal place. Many questions might be sensitive. They might be scared in expressing the truth at that point of time. Considering that it might be disclosed, they might be troubled. Even those questions also, you need to articulate in such a manner that the true information can be traced out. Say, for example, I am telling, say I am asking to Mr. X that are you friendly in nature? Suppose very silent type respondent, no, I am not friendly. Instead of asking that, I can ask, can you tell me that who is your friend lives near to your house? Anybody? Oh, yes, Mr. Y. How far is your house from there? Say it's a 50 kilometer around. Do you visit? Yes, often. When? How many times in a week you go over there? Hardly once. A person is visiting another friend in a month 4-5 times. Is he not friendly? Are you not getting the real response? Then what is the necessity to place a very directive questions? So this is also when you design your questionnaire, you need to follow what type of a questions you are utilizing. Then the next, I'll tell you about the different types of designs. So now I'll tell you the different designs are exploratory, descriptive, explanatory, and experimental. If you talk about the exploratory research, it is defined as a research that is used to investigate the problem which is not clearly defined. It is usually applied to have a better understanding of the existing problem. So ultimately, this research is mostly used to gain more insight, more knowledge over the situation. Used for formulating a problem for more accurate investigation or for developing a hypothesis. Don't you think that in your research you are using exploratory research? The conceptualization, the drawing the rationality of the study, it's nothing, it's exploration. Applied when there are few or no earlier researches are there, study to which references can be made for information. So considering this ontology and epistemological base, some unique area you usually identify, which is an unidentified, untouched element which you want to explore. So this is nothing, this is your exploratory research. Then the next one, I just want to tell you quickly that if you talk about the exploratory research, it includes your primary as well as secondary research, like survey, interview, focus group, observation. These are all your primary process of collecting information. Or you talk about the research literature analysis, the online researches, the case study analysis. These are all the secondary process that support you to establish your exploratory research. Then the next area is your descriptive research, which is it is more statistical in nature, and it describes a phenomenon, as I already told you a little before, like describing the events, social structures, situations, and you always focus on the questions like what, who, where, how, when, and it is more situational in nature and mostly used in physical, natural, as well as your social science research. Then the next research design, that is your explanatory research design, which is used to explore new universe which has not been studied earlier. That means after analyzing the context, you identify the unique area which is unattended area which you need to explain, which you need to analyze by asking why it has happened. So ultimately focus on the why factor, and that is your explanatory research. And the most important, what exactly you are undertaking, that's your experimental research, which is conducted with a very scientific tune, which is being taken care under two variables. The first act like a constant, which is used to measure the difference of the second set, the independent and the dependent play. And if I tell you about the experimental research, there are three types of experimental research designs are there. Pre-experimental research design, true experimental, as well as the quasi-experimental research design. What is a pre-experimental research design? This is very easy, easiest form of experimental design. Various groups are observed after considering factors of cause and effect. Objective is to understand if there is a need for further investigation carried out on the target group, which could be cost effective. That means any kind of research, suppose at an initial stage we enter into the process, we collect the information and we use out of the information, we use some kind of minimal statistical tools, collect the information, see the differences, analyze how it is related with each other, how the independent and dependent variable they are related with each other. When we intend to analyze, that is nothing, that is called pre-experimental. But ultimately what happens, it necessitates more intrinsic or more investigative force, which can be supported by a true experimental research design. And it relies a very strong statistical analysis to prove and disprove a hypothesis, to make it most accurate forms of the research. And this true research design establishes the actual cause-effect relationship within a group. In a true experiment, if you analyze 3 factors that need to be satisfied, number 1, there is a control group which won't be subject to changes. Experimental group, which is experience the change variable. A variable which can be manipulated by the researcher. So ultimately, one is when you establish the group, the control group, where you do not intervene, any intervention will not happen to that. And an experimental group where you intervene something. And you compare the relationship, the aftermath relationship that exists between the experimental as well as the control group. So ultimately, what you need to do here, you usually play with the variable manipulations. Independent as well as your dependent variable. The causal variable as well as the resultant variable. But again, the relationship of independent and dependent variable is also related, is also contextualized in presence of the third variable. Those are called as your extraneous variable. Those are also relevant variables. That they may not have a direct impact on the result, but somehow the result changes because of their intervention. Like sound, air, any. Say for example, I am telling you the sound of the fan. It's a regular noise. But if unusual sound is approaching, that might affect our performances. There is a normal light brightness is there, but constant flicking of the brightness will be happening. Then ultimately that might affect. Then the next one is your quasi-experimental research design. When you talk about the quasi, it indicates similarly in our case, somehow experimental research, but not exactly. That means partly it is experimental, partly not. Quasi-experimental design is similar to experimental, but not same actually. The difference between two is the assignment of the control. That means if you talk about the control, say for example, if you talk about the control group you are using, the process of analysis you are using for the control group, the process of analysis you are using for the experimental group may not be same, and ultimately that can reflect in the quasi-experimental process. If you look at the quasi-experimental design, so this is what, if you look at the experimental group are there and there is a control group are there. And both the experimental groups, say for example, here the learning assessment is made, here the training intervention is made. Say for example, here the learning assessment made as a pre-test condition, both for experimental and as well as the control group. But in case of the treatment condition, the training intervention is made as a treatment condition for experimental, absent for the quasi-experimental. And ultimately, the post-test assessment, learning assessment is there. The difference between the performance is recorded. So here, we are assessing the effect of training. How training has an impact on knowledge acquisition, I need to study. So if I need to study, I can use a quasi-experimental because it is somehow experimental but not truly experimental, because one group is not totally in an experimented condition, but the other group is an experimented condition with an intervention of the training. So here the intervention is absent. That's why it is called as a quasi-experimental research. Then the ex post facto research, as I told you, the ex post facto research in which the independent variable or variables have already occurred, in which the researcher starts with the observation of a dependent variable on the base of the independent variable. As I told you that in ex post facto research, what we do, we study the resultant factor, analyze the resultant factor. Out of that, we identify the possible causal factors. That is nothing, that is called as your ex post facto research design. And whenever you usually establish a kind of the specific steps you need to adopt to establish your experimental design, then what you have to do, first step, define your research questions and variable. As I told you, this is absolutely essential. Your research question must be absolutely pertinent. It has to be objective focused. It has to be very directive, and it has to be intervening in nature. Number two, write your hypothesis. Based upon the research questions, what type of presumptions you are making, what exactly you are expecting, that the whether there will be the impact of the intervention or not. If treatment has an intervention, then what type of changes you are expecting, that hypothesis you need to establish. Then accordingly, design your experimental treatment design you need to establish, and then assess the effect of the treatment. I will show you how. So ultimately, what happens? I told you one thing is that you need to play the treatment process. So how you usually control the treatment condition to assess the effect, that is what. That means in presence of the treatment, what is the state of behavior? In absence of the treatment condition, what is the state of behavior you would like to notice? So considering that, you establish your design, and looking to that, there are two specific designs are there. One is your randomized design, the other one is your complete randomized block design. Complete randomized designs is what? Every subject is assigned to a treatment group at random. That means there is no question. Every subject, say 100 samples you are taking, all 100 samples are exposed with that treatment condition. That means say 100 students you have selected, you provided training, and out of the training, what are the knowledge acquisition you need to assess? That post-training evaluation you need to do. That means all 100 students exposed with the training conditions and being assessed. This is complete randomized design. But randomized block design is what? Say out of 100 students, you distributed 50 boys and 50 girls. And out of 50 boys, 25 boys and 25 girls are there. Similarly, out of so 100 students are there. Out of 100 students, 50 students you made control group, 50 you made experimental group. In experimental group, say boys 25 you are giving training, girls 25 you are not, you are also giving training. So in control group, boys 25 you are not giving training, girls 25 also you are not giving training, and you assess what is the difference of training, number one, what is the impact of the gender, number two. That can be a randomized block design. I will show you now. See, this is what the randomized block design. Look at here, 1200 subjects are there. So 600 men and 600 women. They are randomly assignment. Randomly they are selected either by probabilistic sample or non-probabilistic sample they are selected. So then what happened? Random assignment, what we did, we distributed 600 men in 300 subject each. First group, second one. In the first group, I provided first treatment. In the second group, I provided the treatment too. And now I usually compare the kind of the difference between group 1, group 2. Here not only I can understand the difference, but also I am understanding the difference of two treatment conditions, not one. That's why it is called randomized block design. Here two treatment conditions are there, not one treatment condition. But if I take 100 cases, I am taking 100 cases, I am providing them training, and post-training assessment I am taking. So that is treatment condition 1. But Block design, when it is there, when multiple treatment conditions will be taken at multiple levels of the participant being assessed, that is called randomized block designs. Then the next one is your between subject and the within subject designs. Look at here the between subject and within subject. What is a between subject are there? Total sample. The entire sample, what you are doing, you are comparing into two groups. Then treatment A is given to the group 1, treatment B is given to the group 2. This is called your within between subject. That means between two groups, say boys, girls, or male, female, higher age, lower age. Then you compare higher age with treatment A, lower age with treatment B. Then I compare the effect of treatment A and B. Not only, I also assess the difference between the age. That means two things. The gender impact I am studying, this is intervening context, and the impact of the training also I am assessing. Impact of the treatment I am assessing. Now, within subject, what we are doing? In the within subject, the entire sample is being exposed with the treatment A and also exposed with the treatment B and being assessed. That means the effect of treatment A independently assessed, effect of treatment B is independently assessed, and the effect of both the treatment is also being assessed. That is basically your within subject. Now, pre-test, post-test, control group experimental design. If you look at here, pre-test, post-test, what is a pre-test and what is post-test? Say, for example, I need to assess the training impact. Before training, I need to assess the learning impact, learning achievement. Then we provide training. Then after, I usually assess a post-training. Group A. Group A is provided no treatment condition like a control group. Group B is an experimental group provided with a treatment condition. That means the impact of pre and post-training in presence of treatment, pre and post-training in presence of no treatment is being assessed. That is what pre-test, post-test, control experimental design. This is called control group. Control group is group A, experimental group is group B. So it is control group experimental design, pre-test as well as post-test. Then now the other one is post-test only control group design. If you look at your post-test control group design, what is here? Here experimental group and a control group is there. Subjects are randomly assigned. Experimental group is given with the treatment and the training is given, post-test assessment is there. But in the control group, no training is there, assessment is there. So here I am assessing the impact of the treatment, the impact of the training. Say for example, 10 cases are taken, 10 children are taken, are vaccinated with the COVID. 10 children we are taking, they are not vaccinated with the COVID. Then after certain days, I am assessing the effect of both the cases. Say for example, the control group and experimental group case, those children, they are vaccinated. That means they are treatment based. They are intervened with the condition. And those children, they are not vaccinated, they are the control group. That means those who are vaccinated, what is the effect you are assessing? This is nothing. This is post-test only control group design. Post-test only design with non-equivalent groups. Non-equivalent groups means where both the groups are not of the equal size. And the post-test assessment is there, where the experimental group are intervened with the treatment and the control group are not intervened with the treatment. And the post-test assessment is there between the experimental as well as the control group. So that is a kind of a comparative analysis. And this is nothing, this is post-test only design with non-equivalent group. This is what I was trying to share you in my class. Any doubt is there? Now there are few times are there, you can ask me. Hello.
Okay, now I request our participants to directly you can ask questions to
Any
Professor Bhaktivinoda Das.
sir, have there any chattings?
Okay,
No question. Yeah,
there are some.
They can ask me, sir.
I request all the
Hello.
participants, those who have raised. Yes, ma'am. Please.
Hello, good afternoon. This is Aparna from Bangladesh. How are you, sir?
Yeah, fine. Tell me.
Okay, sir, in research methodology on number 6 point, you have shared like evaluation of the research on data
Yeah.
collection. So, is it about the questionnaire survey, like how we calculate the data or questionnaire survey? Is that thing?
You mean to talk about the evaluation process? Yes or no? Or
Yes.
evolution? What do you want to know?
Yes, evaluation research number 6 point. Exactly, I
Okay, okay.
didn't
Yes, yes,
understand.
yes, yes, yes. See, I just want to tell you, when you talk about the evaluation process of the research, in the evaluation process, I told you just 1 minute. I told you 3 things are there. One, I told you 2 things. One, I told you about the system analysis. The second one is your response evaluation. What is a system analysis? System analysis means basically you need to understand the total system, total context. Because any evaluation tool you are using, any evaluation model you are adopting, that may not be adaptable, that may not be practicable to that particular situation, that particular context. So that's what I tell you. Suppose you are using some evaluation tool to collect an information from a specific age group, from a specific religion group, from a specific class of employee, from a specific type of respondent. So considering to the respondent, what type of evaluation tool you need to adopt? It might be the questionnaire, it might be a case study, it might be a transact, it might be a focus group, it might be the interview scheduling. So this is number one. Number two is that you need to also understand a system analysis. System analysis means whenever you are using any evaluation tool, sometimes there is a question that which type of tool will be best fitting for you. You need to introspect. You need to go for a kind of the analysis, deep understanding about the epistemological process. What other researchers, what type of evaluation mechanisms they have used. Accordingly, you need to establish your own logic to design your evaluation tool. Are you clear? Then the next one I told you about the responsive evaluation. Whenever you are going for a responsive evaluation process, you need to focus on your data collection mechanisms. You need to focus on the data analysis mechanisms. You need to focus on the data interpretation mechanism. Are you clear?
Sir, what type of evaluation will be good for my research? How can I understand?
See, I do not know about your research objective. Basically, you see, this is a very, that's what I told you. I told you about 3 specific questions, sensible questions. Whenever you are talking about a research design, there is a big question that can I take many methodology together, but others are about adopted? Or which type of techniques I will use? So question is that what rationality you have understood from your study? Who are your respondent group? What type of area you need to intervene? Getting my point? Considering
Yes.
that, you need to establish your evaluation technique.
Yes, sir, I have seen that you have some on the research design slide, you have shared some sample questions like, so these are the questions is only for the quantitative or it is also
Also,
qualitative research?
it is
Both.
all. It is not quantitative, it is not. See, qualitative, don't you think it's a research? The most difficult research, qualitative research. The
Okay.
most difficult research. Because it is some completely articulation. Complete articulation. I told you epistemology, 3 things I told you. What are the epistemology I told you? What are the epistemology? I told you about subjective epistemology. I told you about the objective epistemology. I told you about the constructive epistemology. Yes or no? So
Yes, sir.
ultimately, Yes, as a researcher, mostly if you look at the qualitative research, they mostly use a kind of this subjective epistemology that is more philosophical in nature. I'll tell you, Sigmund Freud. Have you heard the name of Sigmund Freud? Have you heard? He worked on dream
No.
analysis. Yeah, dream analysis process. He's a
Okay.
man of psychology. So he articulated very beautifully the dream. He identified three compartments of the mind: id, ego, superego. But all these are very Greek terms and very philosophical in nature. It may not have concrete validity, but it has substantial knowledge contributions to the field of research. So if you talk about the qualitative research are very, very tough. So not necessarily the questions I will say, those are only for the quantitative, it is also for the qualitative research.
Sir, do we have any more session about how to calculate the data?
Of course, you will be getting other resource persons are there. They will be
Okay, okay.
focusing on that.
So
Okay.
will
So,
this is
yeah,
yes, sorry to interfere, Dr. Das, but the addition to this, we have different sessions where how to we can go for data analysis and other things.
yes, yes.
Okay.
Okay. So
Okay, okay.
these are see, basic going deep into the data analysis. We thought to give you some background about what is research design, how to design a research, and what are other aspects which we can take into account while going for the review, writing a review of literature, understanding a literature. All these things will slowly go into the how to also prepare, take a reliability study, because you might have done a questionnaire or you might have drawn a questionnaire from some other source, but some other source means he might have tested the validity, but you have not tested your questionnaire validity. That has to be tested also. Are you getting my point? So those
Yes.
are all slowly process. It's a second day. We'll go with, as far as within these 15 days, how far we can contribute, we'll contribute. But as you were saying, the Dr. Das was listed with so many questions to understand the methodology. Yes, all are required for whether it is a qualitative research or a quantitative research. Basic thing is qualitative research. We are not fixing up with a sample design or sample, and samples are generally included continuous process. In quantitative
Mm,
research, we have fixed up with a sample size, let's say 300, 400 or 1000, which will take. That is fixed, and we collect data from those 1000 or those 800. But in a qualitative research, what happens? We continuously add the respondent. Suppose we don't get some kind of knowledge from 10, then we go to 12th person or 15th or 20. Like that, we continuously add. Are you getting my point?
sir, thank you very much, sir. Now it is clear. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody? Any questions?
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you just tell, like, is there any specific methodology to deal with qualitative data, or when we are like advising students to go for qualitative research? No, is there any specific methodology that we can go for that? Please speak on that.
Yeah, qualitative research, you can use your own methodology, not necessarily the experimental tools I told you. It can be even the information can be also elicited through an interview process. The information also can be elicited through a kind of a group discussion process. It doesn't require any kind of quantitative analysis. You can do that. Or it can be even best suited to a kind of the review of analysis, review of literature. You can do that.
ତମ ରଜ ସରିଗଲା ନା ବି ବିକନ ଏ ରଜ
Hello?
ସରିଗଲା
Anybody?
Sir, I have a question. Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Yeah, tell me.
Sir, it is just slightly out of the context, but I think it's related to this. I'm just asking, sir, let us say you have developed a model in your research work by using some kind of methodology.
Okay.
can I contradict your research? Can it be called as a research? Let us say if I contradict that the model that you have developed X by using this methodology, it is wrong. So can I contradict? Can this be a research?
See, the model you are establishing, that's what I tell you, that three things are there. One is constructive epistemology, I told you. You can construct your own research model, provided the research model must have a logic. Say, for example, you are taking up a research without sample.
Okay.
Without sample, if you are taking any research. So, is it possible?
No, no, not at all.
Then without sample, how could there are basic requirements are there, basic necessities are there. Even when you talk about a sample, say for example, I go for a situation analysis only. I want to go for a situation analysis. What exactly I will collect in that situation, those are all the ingredient for me, which I need to analyze. Minus sample, I will tell that there is no, that I will decide a research proposal. How come it is possible? Some methodology you need to adopt. How you will collect those information? What tool you will adopt to collect those information? How you will narrate it? So some way you need to justify. Whenever you are taking up your research model, yes, I don't say that you need to adopt what your forefathers has done or your previous researchers has told. You need to be more unique. It is more encouraging. But it is encouraging provided it follows some specific practices. Starting from the information collection, then analysis as well as interpretation. It has to be, there should be an alignment. It has to link with your research objective. So when you look at the research objective and you identify the conclusion, the alignment effect has to be there. That has to be. Are you clear getting my point?
Yes, sir. That means in short, you mean to say that we have to adopt the guideline scientific process methodology.
Yes, guidelines you have to adopt. Getting my point?
Yes, sir. Clear, clear. Got it, got it.
Anybody?
Sir, namaskar, sir. I'm Prashant Molli. Sir, I have a question, sir. Sir,
Yeah.
survey research design, sir, it comes under, sir, in which research approach, sir? Qualitative or, sir, quantitative?
What?
Sir, survey research design, sir, it is comes under in which, sir, approach? Qualitative or quantitative?
See, survey research is basically quantitative survey. Getting my point? Because in survey, what you do? What you do a survey? If you go for a qualitative analysis, what survey report is survey tool you have to establish. When a survey tool is established, that is also digitally being indicated. Getting my point?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody?
Sir, can you just please tell something about behavioral research, and in which particular issues can be coming under the type of behavioral research?
The behavior is a very broad term. Which type of behavior you are talking about? It can be a social behavior. It can be a psychological behavior. It can be any kind of behavioral elements. So it can be a behavior of the environment even. Behavioral research you are talking about, if it is animal behavior even, plant behavior might be. So behavioral research you are talking about whose behavior? Human behavior. Whether it is psychological behavior or you are talking about social behavior, or you are talking about a marketing behavior. Getting my point? So accordingly, when you talk about the behavioral research, basically we usually apply some sort of evaluation tools. The evaluation tools, it can be the survey, it can be a questionnaire, it can be a kind of the group discussion, or it can be even an interview schedule. From there, we can intervene into the process, we collect the information, we analyze. So if you talk about the behavioral research, you are from which background? I just want to know.
I'm from applied economics.
You are from applied economics. That means if you are talking about applied economics, ultimately say you are talking about, you are assessing a financial behavior. It is ultimately pertaining to the individual, yes or no? So you can, in that case, you can continue exclusively say a secondary research with the secondary data, or an empirical research taking both qualitative as well as quantitative, collecting both primary as well as secondary information to analyze your report. Based upon the secondary information, even you can do that. Getting my point? Are you clear?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Any question you directly ask to Dr. Das? Instead
Yeah.
of raising hand, please unmute and directly you can ask the question to Dr. Das.
Whom?
Or else I'll do one thing. I'll share your mail ID, sir, with your permission to all
Yeah, you can share. You can
participants,
share.
so that they can write to them, write to you, sir, for any kind of questions.
No issues.
Okay, sir. So I think I should conclude because there are no questions further. Okay. So thank you very much, sir, Professor, for being with us and for a beautiful deliberation on the said topic. Thank you very much, sir. I hope all the participants, they got very good insights and the information from you, sir. Thank you very much.
If they want to ask anything, they can share me through the mail or my WhatsApp number. I can reply accordingly. I can support.
Yes, sir. I'll share in the group, WhatsApp group, your mail ID and details, so they can directly write to you, sir.
No issues.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello, sir. Feedback link.
Okay, no problem. We will communicate WhatsApp group, right?
Okay, sir. Thank you.